Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Scott Luton and Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's live stream. Greg, how are we doing today?
Quite well, Scott. I'm inclined to say supply chain. How now, brown cow? For some reason, don't know why. Felt like to me.
I'm not sure how I can segue from that, Greg.
Sorry,
Maybe tell
man.
me.
I can't hand you the mic every single time. Come on.
That's right. That is right. Well, hey, if you can't tell, we've got a fun conversation
Yeah.
today. Very fun, very informative, kind of a tale of two halves, right? On the front end, well, the whole show is supply chain today and tomorrow with the one and only Mike Griswold with Gartner. So today we're going to be talking about the upcoming release, Greg, of the Gartner Supply Chain Top 25 for 2023, just around the corner. We're getting some of Mike's few key takeaways there from that exhaustive research. And then on the second half, we've got a bonus guest,
Yeah.
Greg, and Donna Krache, who's going to be offering up key takeaways from her 50 years in the workforce, including a couple decades with some of the biggest and largest and most well-known media brands in the business. Greg, you excited for this show?
Yeah. You never know. Donna's been working for 50 years. I'm thinking she probably started she's probably counting a paper route,
Right.
right? Or selling lemonade at the end of the driveway somewhere.
Right.
But yeah, I can't wait to hear. And of course, Mike, we should call it supply chain to infinity and beyond, but somebody might have a problem with that.
Right.
That's why we settled for today.
And that someone might have an army of attorneys
Billions of
as well.
dollars.
So, but hey, this is one of our most popular monthly shows. So you're in a good spot, whether you're checking us out live here today or if you're listening to the audio podcast replay. Okay, Greg, we got three things to knock out before we bring in Mike. I want to start by saying hello to a few folks, including a really special guest that's with us here today. Hey, Michael Banning, how you doing? Tuned in from Southern California. Great to have you. And then Allison Giddens, who happens to be Donna Krache's daughter, one of Donna's daughters. And Allison says, good morning from K-Town. She means Kennesaw, Georgia, of course. And Allison wants to know, Greg, if she paid you to couch her 50 years experience. You'll never tell.
Who knows?
Oh, you'll never tell. Well, hey, Vanessa's with us here. Looks like not only an MBA, but a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. Vanessa, welcome. And you're right here in our awesome city of Atlanta. Looking forward to your perspective here today. Okay, Greg, let's share two quick things, and then we're going to be bringing in the one and only Mike Griswold, the first of two Titanic guests here today. I want to start with, we've got a great live webinar tomorrow, Greg. We've been talking about this for weeks now. Justin Allen from Even Flow, Heidi Banco from Infor getting together and talking about the supply chain transformation that's taking place at Even Flow. You ready for this, Greg?
I am. I brought my Pearl Jam concert T-shirt.
Okay.
So,
never gets old, does it?
Even Flow, the company that makes like baby bottles and stuff like that. So, yeah, that was a musical reference.
So join us tomorrow for that comedic gold and a lot more.
I think what's really interesting about this is we're getting these practitioners to talk with the solution providers so they do this kind of back and forth thing where one says, hey, here's the problem we had. Here's how we tackled it, right? Here's how that interaction went. I think people can learn a lot from these kind of sessions about how to solve a problem or, how to identify a problem, then how to select someone to help you solve the problem, and then how you go about the solving of the problem. These guys are always really open, to share ideas. And get out your 17 pages of notes, Scott.
Oh, man. And then some. And we do it in a very enjoyable way. So y'all check out the live webinar tomorrow at 12 in Eastern time. Unlike a live stream, you got to sign up for this, and the link will be there in the chat. And one other thing, Greg,
yes.
With that said, continues its march forward. We're approaching 22,000 subscribers. This past weekend, we talked about all sorts of reflections. We offered up Donna's full-blown article on reflecting on her journey. We talked about our leadership, supply chain leadership across Africa series, which has been, and we blink and it's 2 or 3 years old now, and a lot more. So, hey, we're seeing a lot of consumption, a lot of interest in this LinkedIn newsletter, huh?
Yeah. Super informative, fun. Honestly, it's a great start to a Saturday morning. If you still get up in the morning on Saturday. But yeah, this most recent one is good. You asked me last week how I liked it.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. This week you didn't ask me, and yes, I did read it.
Well, if you get Greg White's seal of approval and endorsement, you've done something in this life. So, all right. So y'all check that out. We've got the link to both here for the webinar and the With That Said weekly newsletter. And Allison's big fan of the Pearl Jam reference, aren't we all? Proud Gen Xers unite.
Yep.
Okay. So, Greg, all that brings us to our first home run guest here today. Are we ready to welcome in the one and only?
Let's do it.
So with that said, again, one of our most popular guests in series, going on 3 years now, I want to welcome in Mike Griswold, Vice President Analyst with Gartner. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Between Greg's rhyming and his Pearl Jam reference, let's hope this show doesn't go like the Titanic.
Oh, man. He's coming in hot, Greg.
Yeah.
Coming in hot. Well, hey. It's going to be tough
we
to
got
top
people
that.
on the bow checking.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Icebergs.
All right. So, Greg and Mike, that's a good note to start with. A great note to start with, really. So, we're going to start with a little fun warm-up question. We're going to celebrate it's Great American Grump Out Day. It's International Wild Koala Bear Day. It's National Montana Day.
Whoa.
But it's also National Public Radio Day. So perfect for the Pearl Jam references. So this day was established in the 90s. And I want to ask both of y'all, what's one of your favorite memories? We're all moving into everything digital. But when you think about radio, what's one of your favorite memories here, Mike?
So I'm going to take everyone back to the 1980s. I was in high school in the 80s, played basketball, and there was no kind of TV stuff going on. So for a high school, one of the local radio stations did a radio broadcast of our game on Friday night.
Okay.
And then on Saturday morning, we were doing some stuff with some young kids. And then we all got to huddle around the radio and listen to the replay of the game from the previous night. That was pretty cool, right? Hearing your name on the radio as they were describing the game. It was pretty cool.
Man, so were you a star on those radio days? They're celebrating your athletic prowess?
Yeah, no. I came off the bench. I knew my role. I was a good sixth man, but that was about where I was going to peak. We had a really good team. The school has a really good history of basketball. And it was just pretty cool, as a 17, 18-year-old kid to hear your name, and the play-by-play stuff. And obviously today, with all the stuff that's on TV, the radio portion of athletics is probably not nearly what it used to be.
Man,
but it was fun for a kid from a small town, hearing your game, and we played well, we won, so it was all a really good experience.
Love it. All right, Greg, I'm coming to you next for your favorite radio memory, but Mike's comment just reminded me. So I had dinner earlier this week with Paul Noble, Verison, our dear friend at Verison. He was a big athlete in high school and college. Greg, did you know he dropped 60 points in one basketball game as part of his career? Can you believe that?
I did not know that, and now I will not take him up on his one-on-one challenge either. So, because he's big enough to run right over you.
Yes.
He can pop from the outside with that. Had to have shot a lot from the outside in college.
Dangerous.
He's a danger to himself and others.
So, Greg, what's one of your, like Mike shared, what's one of your favorite radio memories?
This is going to sound crazy. I'm from Kansas, and back in the day, AM stations used to have to turn their transmitters down, and you could actually listen to Mexican radio stations because they didn't turn theirs down, so they would overtake certain frequencies. And I used to lay in bed and listen to Mexican radio stations, the music and DJs and all that sort of thing. It's a weird thing. It would never happen today. Even what they call radio is really just streaming. Sirius Sirius took over the other one, whatever it used to be called. But I love that. And then a band came named Wall of Voodoo came out with a song called Mexican Radio, which always make me think about that. But that's what it's about. It's about those of us who lived kind of. I mean, it was hundreds and hundreds of miles from the border, but those
Yep.
stations were it was like they were shouting from the rooftops. It was so cool to listen to.
Man, I can
Weird,
almost
right? It's weird, isn't it?
I can picture that, Greg. Man. All right. So Greg and Mike, both of those memories are tough to top. I would just add in, I've talked about Paul Harvey's impact on my young brain, and I think it would come on the way to school, right? As in particular, we had an old Oldsmobile. It was a tank. You did not want to get in the way of that Oldsmobile. And then we had, of course, like every other American, it seems like back in the late 80s and early 90s, the Caravan, right? And listening to the rest of the story with Paul Harvey just was very well done content, and certainly serves as one of our inspirations here. Okay.
And that's the rest of the story.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot more of that story, but we'll save it for later. All right. So talk about things we're going to save for later. Just in a few weeks, Mike, is the Gartner Supply Chain Top 25 for 2023 is coming out. This has almost become like a yearly parade that the global market enjoys and dives into. And Greg, we can get some of your take on there as well. But
maybe we should make it a holiday like National Supply Chain Day.
Right.
Seriously. I mean,
and a tip of the hat to Mary Kate Love, the official founder of National Supply Chain Day. But Mike Griswold, before we get into maybe some key takeaways and how folks can find it, for just a handful of folks that probably haven't heard of it, what is the Top 25?
So this year, and I know we'll talk about it, the 24th of May is the reveal. This is year 19 of doing this evaluation. It started back in the AMR research stage for anyone that can go back that far, like myself. But we started this as a way to start raising the awareness around what a supply chain is, get people talking about who had good supply chains. But what's emerged as the most important part of the top 25 really is the lessons that we learn from each other. And what can I learn from a different company, maybe even in a different industry, that I can start to bring into my own organization? That we and I don't know, I think this is we have a global fascination with ranking. Right. And that just seems to resonate. It doesn't matter what you're ranking, right? And it certainly spurs debate. When we get together in a few weeks and we talk about the list, there'll be some surprises. There'll be some new folks. There'll be lots of discussions around the list. It's built, though. It is, there's some misconceptions around, it's just a beauty contest. Half of the methodology is around business performance. So 3 financial metrics, environmental, social, governance metric. That's 50% of the methodology. The other 50% is what we refer to as a community perspective. It's a panel of Gartner experts that vote. But this year we had, 179 supply chain professionals from around the world cast their votes around who do they think are the 25 best supply chains. So it really is a way for us to celebrate those companies that we think are leading in supply chain, and really give people an opportunity to learn from them and see what is, Cisco doing, what is Schneider Electric doing. And in many instances, getting exposed to companies that maybe you weren't even familiar with, didn't even know they had a really good supply chain. So next year will be the 20th. We're going to have a lot to do to kind of live up to the 20th anniversary of this. We're already starting to think a little bit about what that might look like. But right now, we're just trying to get our head wrapped around the 19th iteration on the 24th of May.
Excellent. All right. So, Greg, speak to what we were talking to a minute ago. Folks dive into it, they digest it, and they, in some cases, apply it and benchmark their various parts of their operations, right?
Yeah, they should, because even if not in your own industry, even if not, most of these companies are well larger than most of the companies who consume this list, but still there is something applicable at your scale from everyone in this top 25. And of course, I know you have the masters also, right? Can we expect anyone to be added to the masters this year?
I don't want to say too much. There will be no additions. I'll leave it at that. How's that?
Yeah, that's good. So there's really 30 companies, because there's some that are so excellent that they continue, that they would dominate the top 5 if we didn't take them out and put them in
Correct.
this manager's class, right?
Correct.
So it's it's a great group of companies, great insights, even just the targets or the principles, not even the details of how they accomplish the greatness in their supply chain is really important.
Yep. Well said. So I love the 179 practitioners across the globe that all became new delegates and voted. That's wonderful.
Yeah, that's really, really good.
I completely agree. And then also to what both of you are implying or speaking to is it's so important not only to get outside of our 4 walls and our thinking and evaluating and looking for innovation, but outside of our sector, outside of our niche, outside of our industry. And I love the opportunity this exists there, that presents there. So Mike, let's get some of your key takeaways, whatever you can share, 2 or 3 from this year's top 25. And then Greg, I'll get your comments on that.
Yeah, so I have some notes in front of me because this is hot off the press. But there were 3 macro themes that we identified this year. And these are the things that these leading companies are focused on. And to Greg's point, whether you are 12 billion or higher, which is one of the criteria to get into the population that gets evaluated, or whether you're not at 12 billion in revenue yet, these 3 trends are highly applicable. The first is around asking the supply chain to be able to drive growth while at the same time work in an environment that's got heightened risks. We know that there always has been a natural tension between the chief financial officer and the chief supply chain officer, right? The finance guy or gal focused on how do we deliver margin? How do we drive lower costs? Well, while the supply chain is trying to figure out, at least in the last several years, how do we become that engine for growth?
Right.
So there's that natural tension where the supply chain has to be seen in the organization as a lever to drive growth, while at the same time, we need to figure out how do we manage risk. Things like supplier risk, things like how do we become more agile and responsive. So that's one trend that we see in organizations, in these leading organizations, is their ability to drive growth and manage risk. The second one is what we built on and talked about last year, which is the idea of ecosystems. That organizations and supply chains in particular need to be able to navigate a world that not only has many-to-many relationships within, or a one-to-many relationship within their own organization, to an ecosystem that has a many-to-many relationship. We talked about co-opetition last year. We're seeing this ecosystem really applied in 3 areas, focusing on how do we deliver this idea of a living wage to not only our associates, but even upstream, right? How do we facilitate living wage for some of our suppliers that maybe are in underdeveloped nations? Regenerative agriculture and net zero emission goals. Those are all things, especially if you think about net zero, right? And scope 3, which is what are my suppliers doing from an emission perspective, and how do I influence that? That is a many-to-many ecosystem type of mindset. And the third is this idea of connected solutions and people. Last year, we talked about this idea of human-centric digital automation. This is kind of the next iteration that when we talk to leading companies and they're talking about this connection, they're talking about connected customers, connected suppliers and partners, and connected associates. So if I think about connected customers, how do I become better in a B2B or a B2C environment? When I'm thinking about suppliers and partners, how do I connect with them so that I can understand supply risk better? So things like control towers, as just one example. The use of AI and IoT, right, as a couple other examples around how we maintain that connection. But probably the most important element of any of the 3 I'm talking about is connected associates. It's around the employee value proposition, right? How do we align work with the people, both from a location and a type of work? How do we manage that intersection of people and technology? That's going to be critical for us to figure out how we manage that, particularly leveraging what we learned during COVID around how people like to work, how people and where people want to work. The connected associate is probably the biggest piece that's going to underpin anyone's success moving forward. And I'll give you one last teaser.
Okay.
For an executive report that someone on my team is writing. It won't come out until October. We just kicked off the research, and it's something we'll probably want to talk about maybe on one of our upcoming shows. It's this idea of how do you embrace turnover? It's basically changing the mindset to say, if I think back about my career, Greg, probably your career, Scott, your career, turnover was always seen as bad. And we had to figure out how do we minimize turnover. I think what our research is leading us towards, and where we're going to be a bit provocative, is to say you need to embrace turnover. It's going to happen. How do you adapt to it? How do you manage it? How do you manage turnover such that you have this idea of boomerangs? It's going to be a fascinating piece, but it underscores what I think is the importance of people in how these supply chains are going to continue to evolve.
Okay, man. All right, Greg, we're going to dive in there and get your take in just a second. I got to share Allison's comment here. I hear themes of resiliency and visibility, Allison says, and Mike's observations. I'd add I'm seeing mind reading as a supply chain demand too. That one might be more controversial. Love it, Allison. Keep it up. And looking forward to a great show with Allison in the weeks ahead. Okay, Greg, Mike shared 4 great things there that we could probably build a series around each of those. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you're going to be stunned at this, Scott, but this was so compelling. I actually took notes.
Man, wow. Stop the press. Stop the press.
Right. I'm sure people were listening to my keyboard click. I want to start with the end, the last point. And I think one of the things we have to acknowledge is not just turnover, but exodus, because we already had a over 10% unemployment rate in supply chain just in the U.S., even before 2020. And then baby boomers started retiring at record rates when they were already retiring at 10,000 a day through the whole workforce.
Right.
I have long been an advocate. Both of you know this. I have long been an advocate for, we don't need to apologize for automating or autonomizing certain jobs anymore, because people don't want those jobs. The incoming generations, our generation X, Y, and Z, don't want those jobs. They don't want as we've coined the phrase, the dark, dirty, dangerous, and dull jobs. And you can see it every day as manufacturers and trucking companies and even fulfillment warehouses, right, struggle to get and keep workers. And I think what will happen as the exodus, it probably is going to decelerate, but as the exodus displaces workers who have no replacement, for which people do not desire to take those jobs, right? We'll start to see those jobs get automated. We already are starting to see some of those jobs get automated, and I say good on it. The only reason, honestly, those jobs were still done by people is because the baby boomers demanded it, and as we know, they get what they demand because they're the biggest generation in the history of Earth. So now that they aren't advocating to keep those kind of jobs, I think we'll see automation come in there. So you don't have to credit me, Mike, but if they want to add embracing turnover and exodus, I'm fine with that.
All right.
I think the other thing to think about is this notion of heightened risk and driving growth. And I don't know the context of that discussion, but I hope the context of that sentiment is driving real growth, not just driving savings. Because as we know, the relationship of supply chain with finance has always been cut cost, but don't fail.
Yeah. Right.
And now I think companies are starting to recognize, though I feel like we've backslid. Many have backslid a bit since things have returned to more normal, or the new abnormal, whatever you want to call it. I hope that we evolve that viewpoint to be actually driving growth. I think people in the executive suite now more than ever realize that supply chain is the business. If you sell something physical, especially, supply chain is the business, right? there's only one job that supply chain has, and that is deliver. Now, there are a lot of interim objectives and tasks that are required to do that. But if your customer wants what you got and you promised that you would get it to them, that's what supply chain does. And, of course, there's all kinds of qualifiers, and we'll see them in the comments, I'm sure. On time, in full, quality control, blah, 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 right?
Make it happen.
Where they want it, all of that stuff. Those things we have to start to presume. We don't need to explain those to the consumer because inherently they get that, right? Delivery to them means all of those things. So, but this notion of evolving to a risk balanced initiative rather than a cost saving initiative is really important to that first point, Mike. If we're going to drive growth, then we have to not only embrace it as an industry or as a division of the company, but also impart that knowledge to especially the finance department, to the sales department, and to the executive suite. Because we can always drive growth, but we can't always do it while minimizing risk, and that balancing exercise is critical to express to people.
Here's the challenge, Greg, and you hit on it. I think very directly. We did published a report, I think in February, Future Supply Chain 2023, and unfortunately, Greg, what you just alluded to, we're starting to see in the data, and what that is if we look through kind of the pandemic, what we saw in terms of the perception of the supply chain. Right, people valuing the supply chain, giving the supply chain a seat at the table. It was going up, right, and it peaked at around 2021. Right, everyone said, "Oh my gosh, we got a supply chain, we need to keep it." Well, guess what's happened? We have come out of the pandemic, and unfortunately, that line is now reverting. And we talk about this in the future of supply chain. We're going to talk about it next week at Symposium about this idea of not reverting. Because what we saw is when we looked at the data and we parsed out high-performing companies from less-performing companies, 72% of the high-performing companies were still on this trajectory with their supply chain. Right. It is still important. It still has a seat at the table. We had almost 50% of the companies, though, saying through their responses, the supply chain was going to revert to kind of how we thought about it before the pandemic. And my message to everyone is you can't revert. Right. Yes. Our top 25 companies are not going to revert. The masters are not going to revert. Right. And you could argue the reason they were top 25 company or masters, they were ahead of that curve to begin with. Right.
Right.
They saw their supply chains early on. Look at people like P&G and Unilever. Right. Look at someone like Amazon. Their supply chain has been a competitive weapon almost since day one.
Right.
So my message to folks is within your organization, if your organization is starting to sound and feel like it's going to revert, you need to push it back up, right? Yep. Supply chains have to remain at the center of these conversations for all the reasons that you cited.
Okay, so for the sake of time, I gotta kind of bring this segment to. No, it's good. This is golden stuff. I just want to add. I was talking to a Fortune 1000 chief supply chain officer this morning, and that's exactly what one of his primary concerns about backsliding now that there's less pressure that the pandemic brought and the early post-pandemic brought. So we're going to tee this up for additional conversation soon. I want to make sure, let's go ahead and make sure folks know how to check out the Gartner Supply Chain Top 25. There's a great webinar coming up on May 24th, Mike, that you're hosting along with some of your colleagues. We've got the link we're going to drop. Really quick, Mike, tell us about that webinar. And how else folks can get the top 25.
So the report and a couple of ancillary reports will publish literally right after the webinar. I think the webinar is 10 to 11 Eastern. You'll have to fact check me on that, but it is the 24th. Right after that webinar happens, we're going to publish the global note. We're going to publish a methodology note for like the 6 people that care. And then we're going to do a whole set of slides around our industry cuts.
Yep.
So there's a ton of information that's available right after the webinar. People can certainly reach out to me afterwards as well. If you can't get a hold of stuff, happy to send that along. It is the webinar, one of the more popular ones that we have across all of Gartner.
Yep.
And the research is some of the most widely read outside of things like Magic Quadrants. One of the more highly read notes that comes out of the supply chain every year.
Okay. So I hate as much as I hate to close this segment, I can't wait for the next one. I'm going to use a couple comments to segue over. And folks, again, we got a link to that May 24th, and I believe it is at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Y'all check that out and consume and use all the great research that Mike and the team provides each and every year. So Vanessa, on that fourth one, and I'm going to use the Greg Mike version of this, right? How to embrace turnover and exodus as that little additional word that Greg put on there. Vanessa says new employees have new ideas and can raise the bar for your team. And Joseph says, hey, I believe where companies have missed the mark is the development of employees alongside those who are exiting the workplace. So I'm going to use that great comments as a segue into the workforce, because the second half of today's chat, Mike and Greg, we're going to be diving into someone that's celebrating 50 years in the workforce. So bonus coverage here today to steal maybe a golf turn. Special guest joining us. I want to introduce Donna Krache, executive producer for Supply Chain Now and media consultant to the stars. All right. Good.
Consultant to the stars, Donna.
I'm telling you, this is too good.
That's hard to fit on a business card.
It really is. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, Donna, welcome in. You're always behind the scenes here doing great work. This is your first appearance on Supply Chain Now, so welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, so Mike and Greg have set the great bar high on the front end. Donna, I know you're gonna hit a grand slam with some of your perspectives here. It's great to have you and Mike on the same show. I want to start with setting some context. As we spotlighted in our With That Said newsletter, you did a great write-up looking back, like full reflections of 50 years you're celebrating in the workforce this year. Tell us a little bit for context. What were some of your roles, Donna?
And thanks for the compliment at the top of the show, Greg. That was awesome. But I started at McDonald's, as McDonald's is a great place for kids. They are so good at hiring young people and teaching you a lot of life skills that you're not going to learn anywhere else. So I started there, but then I went on to do so many other things. I mean, I had to make a list. I've been a high school teacher. I've been a real estate broker. I've been a speech writer. I've been the head of communications for the Georgia legislature. I've been a news writer. I was an executive producer, and I was also a digital producer and a web editor. So I've kind of been all over. And at the end of it all, I taught at Georgia State University, which I really enjoyed. And now I am a media consultant. So it's kind of, I've been all in state government. I've been in the private sector. I've been a small company manager. It's been quite a ride.
Undoubtedly. And we've really enjoyed our collaboration over the last couple of years. And Mike and Greg, this is going to be kind of the challenge here, because we're about to have Donna share some key takeaways as she reflects on her career. I wonder if there are any parallels to some of the research findings from the top 25, Mike, that we released in a few weeks. So we'll see. Mike, you're going to, I think you're about to say something there. I'm reading your mind, maybe.
Yeah, there definitely is, Greg. I mean, I think one of the things is, as we listen to Don, it's about experiences, and it's about collecting as many experiences as you can, figuring out what you can take from all of those that you can then use to leverage with your next experience. I mean, that to me is what you having a career is all about, right? It's about gaining those experiences.
Exactly. He just took the whole, so I'll leave.
Well, Greg, I'll get your take too, but Allison shares in the comments, you also taught me how to use a spoon. I love that. And kidding aside, I've known Allison for a long time. In fact, before I met Donna and Greg, you're taking her in a second, but man, Allison's now leading a manufacturing operation in the aerospace industry, doing really big things. And that's just tip of the spear, because they also, as we talk about the Dave Krache Foundation, giving back, giving forward, as Greg has coined, to the community and then some. So, man, you beyond all of that, you also were a wonderful parent, impactful parent. Greg, your thoughts before we get some of Donna's favorite reflections.
God, I don't know where to start. I mean, first of all, I'm surprised that you didn't count your lemonade stand and still have spent 50 years in the workforce. But it's cool. I had always heard that about McDonald's. To me, that's one of those things that jumps out is that they are so good at training you. And because they had this mantra of, everything exactly the same in every single store.
Yep.
They're very disciplined. I think Chick-fil-A is another good example of that, where they teach you not just work skills and what the responsibility and accountability of being in the workforce is like, but also additional life skills.
Absolutely.
I hope everybody has that, whether they work at any particular place. I hope they have that kind of mentorship in their first job. And it really does cement for me the thought that even if you don't plan to stay, working for a big company with a good training program, a disciplined training program, is a really, really good place to start. It's a good jumping off point for your career, even if you only do it for a summer when you're in high school or whatever, right?
Yeah. Great point. So, folks, we get a lot of questions around career development always in our shows. Take that one to heart. All right, so Donna, we're going to take these one by one. There's a couple. Maybe we get a third one from you. Just share the first one, then Greg and Mike, I'm going to come to you all for your commentary. So, Donna, as you reflect back, what's the first key takeaway?
I'm actually going to go backwards because I really, based on what Mike is saying, I think it's a good transition point. Speaking of, the exodus and turnover, I don't think people realize that the way you exit a company matters. And we've all seen this, and I've seen in 50 years, I've seen the workplace bring out the worst and the best in people, right? So if you're going to leave and chew out your boss and raise a scene, you get that momentary satisfaction of, I told him where to go. Right? I mean, and I've seen people do it.
Yeah.
But I've also seen people who leave with grace. And I've seen people who are very humble, who are very, thanks for the opportunity. When I left my last corporate employer, it was a downsizing. And I took the time to go and make an appointment with every executive at that company. And I sat down because I had kind of when you're laid off, you have that lead time, right? So I had the luxury of being able to go see everyone, thank them for the opportunity, tell them what a blast it was, a great ride. And, I hope our paths would cross again in the future. And you would be surprised how that has played out.
Mike, I'll come to you first on this first key takeaway. Grace and humility are more than just words. Your thoughts, Mike, on this first one?
Yeah, it takes a level of kind of emotional and intellectual maturity to be let go, and how you respond to that. Donna's exactly right. We have probably once a month at Gartner, we have kind of a notification that pops up on Inside Gartner around what we call boomerangs. People who have left Gartner, done different things, and then come back. The Gartner culture is very welcoming of boomerangs. To Donna's point, though, I'm sure depending on how you left.
Right.
So I think the advice is spot on around, depending on the circumstances, right? Having a more, intellectual response and less of an emotional response is what you want to strive to do. The reason for that is, one of my bosses told me one time, you never know who your next boss is going to be. You just never know. And that's why it's important as a manager to treat everyone well, because you never know, at some point, someone who's working for you, you might be working for them at some point. So this idea of how you treat people while you're with them and how you treat the company when you leave is incredibly important.
Greg, what would you add to Mike's commentary there?
Well, I'd love to add at least one real life example to that, but I won't, because I have had someone leave in a way that they felt was completely justified, and then we bought the company that they went to, and it did not go well for them. Anyway, I do think that it is a matter of maturity. Even if you're incredibly pissed off at your boss or you hate the place you work at, it's still a reflection on you. You felt the need to say something emotional or outrageous or offensive or whatever on your way out, right? If it's getting to that point, leave before you get to the point where you have to say something. Right? That would be my guidance there. But yeah, I mean, of course, you want to leave with grace. If you are, and many of you are, still going to work for 20, 30, 40 years into the future, some of you youngsters even longer, then there's a very good chance that you're going to come across somebody that you've met before, and you want them to at least not hate your guts, right? At least not have it out for you, right? Because there are people also who will sit back there and just wait, and they'll remember you. I was thinking, about how this reflects on people coming into companies, Donna, because there was that short window of time where people were ghosting companies. Believe me, those companies remember that. And now, as the time to start cutting employment occurs, when those people are put on the street, they've limited their pool of potential employers by doing that.
I think the other thing I'll add real quick, Scott, is social media has really made this way too easy.
Yep.
And to me, back to Donna's point around, trying to curb that emotional reaction, because there are so many ways you can do that now. So back when I was working, right, it was, you would have to either literally ring someone up on a landline or go into their office and yell at them. Forget that now. Now it's you've got Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and there's probably 6 that I'm not even aware of because I'm old. So the whole social media thing makes it so easy to take that emotion out in the world. And to Greg's point, I mean, if you as a future employee don't think companies are looking across social media at what you're doing and saying, you're naive.
Yep.
They may not say that out loud, but that's happening. So Donna's advice is spot on, right? It's you just got to curb that emotional reaction to the best of your ability.
That's right. All right. I'm going to add 2 quick things here. Number 1, I want to flip it over, because not only is how we conduct ourselves as team members, but hey, if you're in a position of leadership and you've got to make those tough decisions, think with empathy, right? And do it the right way. And then I'm also going to add, I think this is Korai Koze, one of Mike's colleagues, I believe this is.
Yes.
Who says integrity is owned to yourself first, and that will reflect into every situation. So handling difficult situations the way you would like to be treated is going to give you the long-term peace of mind and inner happiness. That is Shakespearean. Great stuff there. Okay. So Donna, man, see what your reflection has done. What a great little snippet of conversation. What's number 2?
My number 2 one is, if you want to get ahead, or if you want to be noticed, do the jobs nobody else wants to do. I got my first big break in the news business. By the way, I am not a journalism major. Okay. I was a political science major, but I got my first big break by showing up for a tryout for writers. And as soon as they told us it was overnights, half the applicants left the room. They didn't want to work overnights. Well, I happened to be a bit of a night owl, and so I didn't mind that. And I knew it was one way to get into the system. And I think, I tell a lot of young people this when I mentor or when I'm teaching at Georgia State or anywhere else, because a lot of them come to me in journalism and they all want to be sportscasters. And that's awesome. I love sportscasters. I love sports. You guys know that. But you can't all be that. So you have to start by doing something else. And one thing I recommend, if you're in high school and you want to be a sportscaster, start covering your local high school games on a website, or even better, go to your local digital media, your local newspaper that's online or news station, and tell them, I'll cover the sports you guys don't have time to do. Let me do it for free for a couple of weeks. If you like me, then we can talk about paying me. And that's a great way to get your foot in the door. But see, that's the job nobody else wants to do. A lot of schools have incredible programs in sports like lacrosse and field hockey, and they're not getting the kind of coverage basketball and football are getting. So cover those sports. Do the job nobody else wants to do or nobody else can do. And I think if you answer, yes, I can, more than you say, no, I don't know how to do that, you'll be surprised how fast you're noticed and how well you will do.
I love that. Okay, Mike, get your take on willingness to do what others aren't willing to do.
Another great observation. I think what comes to mind when I hear that are a couple things. One, and we've talked about this in the past from my coaching experience, it's get comfortable being uncomfortable. So doing things that no one else wants to do is probably going to take you into areas you're uncomfortable, either because of the hours in Donna's example, it could be the job itself, but it is around not only the point around how do I get noticed, right, which is important. It's also about how do I acquire skills. So this idea of thinking about maybe what not so much the job you have now, what's the job you want next or the job you want after that job, and what are the skills that you need to be able to put yourself forward for those future jobs, and figuring out how do I acquire those skills. And Donna's exactly right. Acquiring some of those skills are going to ask you to do things that no one else wants to do. They're going to ask you to do things that are probably uncomfortable for you right now. So to me, we have kind of some generations that I don't think, frankly, and this could be like the old guy, get off my lawn talk, but I think we've got some generations that just don't want to be uncomfortable. And I don't think as a person, I don't think you grow if you're always comfortable. And I don't think you will grow career-wise if you're not willing to put yourself in some uncomfortable situations.
Okay. Greg, I get your take on Donna's second reflection there.
Yeah, I think doing what others want doesn't mean necessarily even a different job title or tough hours. Sometimes it's just doing the job a little bit better, the very same job that somebody might be doing, right? If you're a payroll entry clerk, right, or a garbage man, right, it's putting the garbage cans back where you found them. Thank you to my garbage guys who came today. They are going above and beyond, and they'll get a Christmas present. So, but I think sometimes it doesn't have to be as dramatic as working overnight. Sometimes it's just doing the job, and maybe finding a little thing that that isn't typically done, or finding something that could improve the outcome of your role, things like that, and sharing that. I mean, but be genuine about it. Yep. That's the other thing is don't expect and don't ask to be elevated. Show that you deserve to be elevated.
Yeah. Well said, Greg. Well, for the sake, I knew didn't have time to get all three of y'all's brilliance in like an hour, especially given these big topics. I do want to encourage people to check out. You can do it via. With that said, there's a link to Donna's full article where she goes into all of these key reflections based on an incredible career. So y'all check that out and let us know. Comment on that article and let us know what your thoughts are there. Donna's got so much more good stuff. But as we move into this last segment, I really want to focus on the Dave Krache Foundation, Donna, because as we mentioned on the front end, you and Allison and the team, your board, and then, of course, a community of support. Y'all been able to move mountains. So let's start with Donna. Tell us what the Dave Krache Foundation is and does.
Dave Krache Foundation was started about 11 years ago by my daughter, Allison, who wanted to figure out a way to remember her dad. And I think she had read somewhere that if you see someone's name, if someone says his name, that means he's still with us. So that's one way to remember him. And Dave was an incredible sports fanatic. I mean, he had a mind for trivia, loved almost every sport. And so we came up with the idea of helping families help their kids play sports. There are a lot of families out there that are hurting, and it's two-parent families, it's single-parent families, it's foster parents, it's grandparents who have young kids, and the only thing they want for this kid is the ability, or the ability really to play sports. But sports are expensive, whether you're talking high school, middle school, or rec league. So what we do is we pay the fees for those kids to play. And we have incredible demand. To date, we've helped about 1,100, 1,200 kids at least. And I know last night our committee went through another very broad list of requests for help. A lot of times we help the individuals, but we also sometimes provide grants to some of the high schools. There are people who, some of these small nonprofit rec leagues for special needs kids to play soccer, and the Marietta PAL and Cobb PAL leagues. We've helped those, the police who are so good about helping these kids stay engaged and stay active. We've helped them. So we're all over Metro Atlanta. And it's been a real honor to do it. And I got to tell you, it's incredible work when you see that kid's face light up that he can play or she can play. Mm-hmm. And it's because the money's there.
All right. Thank you for sharing such an outcomes-driven nonprofit that's really impacting lives in a very practical way. I love that. Before I get Greg and Mike's comment here, I want to make sure everyone has the link to the Dave Krache Foundation. Check it out there. Man, you got to love a really good story, just a simple way of really changing lives. And I love the how it was all founded. Greg, let's start with you here because we have again had the pleasure of rubbing elbows with Donna and Allison and seeing the Dave Krache Foundation and its impact kind of up close and personal. Your thoughts here around the mission?
I love it. First of all, I'm Donna and I have talked about it a few times about things they are doing and can do. But I'm a firm believer that kids need sports. Kids who are playing sports are in less trouble than kids who are just hanging out. Those are the three most dangerous words your children can ever say, just hanging out. Because just hanging out is never, ever productive. And sometimes it's very counterproductive. So don't let your kids just hang out. But getting them into sports gives them so much opportunity to build teamwork ahead of their time in the workforce, to be responsible to and for other people beside themselves. Mike's favorite sport, basketball, baseball, football, lacrosse, hockey, whatever, even golf, right? They teach you things like honesty and fair play and teamwork and things like that. And at the same time, it is, I don't know, not everybody is an athlete, but it was tremendously powerful for me. And I really appreciated the opportunity to be able to do it. And it pains me that there are kids that can't because they can't afford the fees or they can't afford the equipment or they can't get a ride or whatever it is, right? And that's what Dave Krache does in the Atlanta area is to help these kids get to something that will positively impact their lives for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. And to me, there's no higher calling than helping kids to affirm themselves and expand themselves, to get uncomfortable, to Mike's point, and to embrace that and to recognize that it won't destroy you, right?
Right. Yeah. And hey, look here, Karai Koze making an instant donation. Big thanks there.
Thank you.
Hey, to any of our listeners, Mike, I'm coming to you in just a second, but to any of our listeners or viewers, folks across global audience, or folks right here in Atlanta, hey, check out the site. If you can make a donation, give from what you can give. As Greg likes to say, give big, give small, but just give, especially in this case, because this is a personally vetted mission and organization. All right. So Mike, the segue here, and you're going to get the last word here, is as thankfully one of the great things we're seeing out in the industry is a greater emphasis and demand and expectation on doing good, right, across the corporate landscape from all stakeholders, it seems. Your thoughts on the Dave Krache Foundation, Mike?
It's fantastic. I mean, I think and Greg, I think, said it the best. I mean, sports are a microcosm of life. If you just think about, and I think sports for young kids is I agree with Greg, just hanging out usually is not good. So getting young kids, engaged in activities, learning how to work with someone else towards a mutual goal, right? Donna mentioned McDonald's, right? Sports teach you life skills. And especially as you get older, right? When I think about the girls that I work with, where I coach in terms of the varsity basketball, it is for them, we're trying to teach them life skills. You will come across people you don't like. You will come across a boss you don't like, right? It's just going to happen. And you need to figure out, without your parents around, you need to figure out how you're going to deal with that. Because, in 15 years in a job, you don't like your boss, you can't call your mom or your dad, right? You got to sort these things out. So sports, regardless of the sport, right, I think gives you an opportunity to start to learn life skills at a very early age. And I'm a firm believer that you are never too young to start learning life skills.
Yes.
Like learning how to use a spoon, right?
Right.
I mean, it's you're never too young to learn how to use a spoon.
There you go.
Nice. Okay. So here, as we start to wind down, we're going to ask Donna and Mike how folks can connect with you and your missions and what have you. And then Greg, you're going to get the last challenge to our audience here as we wrap. So Donna, let's start with you. Quick question. How can folks support what you're doing and where can they learn more? And of course, we've got the URL we're going to pop up.
Okay. DaveKrache.com. Krache is my last name. And if you go there, we also have a fundraiser this Saturday. I'll make a shameless plug at the Marietta Wine Market from 2 to 4. Yeah. Wear your best derby hat and enjoy some wine with us. And for me personally, if you'd like to reach out to me, you can message me on LinkedIn, Donna Krache.
It's just that easy. Thank you so much for what you do, both within the four walls here, so to speak, at Supply Chain Now, and more importantly, what you're doing out in industry, you and Allison, the whole team. All right. So Mike, and the first half, both halves we talked about, Greg, the tale of two halves, dynamo stuff, right? Dynamo, so much purpose in this full conversation. Mike, how can folks connect with you and the heavy hitters over at Gartner?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Gartner.com. And if anyone's at our supply chain event next week, I'll be there as well. Feel free to grab me. Love to meet people that are participating in the show and hopefully getting value out of it. So, and as always, appreciate the chance to be here with everyone.
Wonderful. And of course, the May 24th webinar related to the Supply Chain Top 25 reveal is right there in the chat. Thank you so much, Mike Griswold. Okay, Greg. Your favorite thing you heard here today, or the challenge to our global listening audience, and viewing audience? What's your final thought here today, Greg?
I think it's funny how and poignant how assessing a career, talking about a nonprofit organization, and talking about excellence in supply chain, the confluence of that, and how there's a lesson in that for everyone, right? Whether you're an athlete, whether you're a business person, whether you're inclined to give to charity or not, or whether you're just getting started, not even just in your career, but with your life. What this has kind of pointed out to me is we're not just about supply chain, right? We're just about business and life and life skills and that sort of thing. And I think that is just so powerful to see people who've been in the workforce for a long time. Longer than us, Scott, makes me feel better, so much better. And continue, by the way, to be in the workforce. Donna is not done, so you better not be done anyway. But also to learn from people who have so much skill and practical knowledge and who deliver it, as Donna and Mike both do, so maturely.
Incredibly, extraordinarily,
but also in very mature and very mature fashion, and most not too.
Not true. Savvy.
I think seeing those perspectives and seeing that these two people who've never met one another and literally live thousands of miles away from one another have a very common outlook on life and business and charity and sports and whatever else, right? So I think it's a good opportunity to see that we are all in some way connected, right? Life is an ecosystem. It really is.
All right. Well said, Greg, as always. Hey, folks, make sure you connect with Donna Krache and the Dave Krache Foundation. Make sure you connect with Mike Griswold and Gartner, the webinar, the Gartner Supply Chain Symposium, you name it. But hey, more importantly, perhaps, is be like Donna and Mike. And on that note is what Greg and me and Amanda and Catherine, everyone wants to challenge you to do. Deeds, not words. Take action. Do good. Give forward. And be the change. And we'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.